How close is Canada to losing Alberta? What's their deal anyway? What is ours? I'm Larry Fedorik, and this is Later That Same Life. On each episode of my weekly podcast, a different topic, discussion, or story from our lives.
Season 16, Chapter 12.
Alberta.
Talk of Alberta's separation has really heated up over the last few weeks. The MAGA-loving Mar-a-Lago visiting premier of the for now province of Alberta, Danielle Smith, says she does not support Alberta's secession from Canada, but would respect the will of the people should they want a referendum, i.e. a public vote on the matter. Here's a point about how most democracies, including ours, work. The people can't just vote on every issue that comes up. Instead, we elect representatives to do that for us. The more active among us contact them to express our pleasure or displeasure on how they are representing us. We agree or disagree with how they are running things. And after a while, we vote again. But occasionally an issue comes up that goes to referendum, a plebiscite. It's like a survey, except the results are a little more official, and we expect our government to act upon the results of a referendum vote. As I said, not everything can just go to a plebiscite. So how do you get one? Well, people organize and create a petition. If enough people sign it, then the government has to act. That's where Alberta is at. There's a petition, and it's gaining momentum. Danielle Smith says if people want a referendum on separation, she'll give them one. You may have heard people ask, well, is Danielle Smith just fanning the flames of a separation movement? Or is she simply responding to the will of the people who elected her? Correct answer is a bit of both. A referendum. When? Some experts say that it could happen by the end of this year. Certainly early 2026. And I really don't know what would have to happen for Alberta to change their mind on this. After all, they've been grumbling about separation for almost 100 years. Oh yeah, this Wexit, as some are now calling it, has been brewing for decades. For the record, Alberta and Saskatchewan joined Confederation on the same day, September 1st, 1905. Previous to that, they had been districts within the Northwest Territories. Here's a recap of what most Canadians should know but likely do not. 1867 British North America Act forms Canada. Provinces are Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. 3 years later, Manitoba becomes province number 5. A year later, anyone? Bueller? British Columbia. 2 years after that, Prince Edward Island. And that was it. That was Canada for over 30 years. The Magnificent Seven. Slowly, the politicians and deep thinkers of the day began to imagine a large nation that stretched from sea to shining sea, with no gaps, just like America. So they offered Alberta and Saskatchewan the chance to join in on this grand experiment. They offered them cash and coupons. Yeah, really, for development and infrastructure. The territories agreed. September 1st, 1905. We were 9 provinces. P.S. Newfoundland held out until 1949. By 1935, there were already disgruntled grumblings in Alberta. Like maybe we made a mistake joining this family. Out of that came something called the Social Credit Party. The Social Credit Party's main platform was built on getting more federal financial support for Albertans who were suffering because of the Great Depression. The party was founded by William Aberhart and Ernest Manning, and under Aberhart, they swept to power in 1935. Here's part of an old Aberhart radio address.
On the occasion of our first anniversary of the Social Credit victory at the polls, the people of this great province of Alberta declared by ballot rather than by bullet that they were determined to have economic freedom. It appears to me, ladies and gentlemen, the world has its eyes upon Alberta. They are praying that we may succeed.
Aberhart continued as premier until 1943. He was replaced then by his pal and co-founder, Ernest Manning, who served for 25 years as premier until 1968. By the way, Ernest Manning had 2 sons. One of them, Preston Manning, as you know, the great Super Bowl winning NFL quarterback. Oh no, that was Peyton Manning. Ernest's son was Preston Reform Party Manning, who to this day at age 82, during this last federal election, sowed the seeds of Albertan discontent. A social credit was a term used for the idea of giving all the citizens a monthly government check, a welfare, if you will, to increase their purchasing power and help stimulate the economy during that Great Depression. The Canadian Liberal Prime Minister of the day, William Lyon Mackenzie King, famously said that he would not give a 5-cent piece to any non-liberal provincial government to aid in unemployment relief. Using the clause from the British North America Act, the feds voided the Alberta social credit idea. If you thought that cutting state funding to those who did not toe the federal party line was a Trump thing, well, apparently not. It appears to be steeped in history. But back to Alberta. Eberhard then secured provincially owned banks, and some relief money went out. No thanks to the feds. Citizens then of the 1930s called for separation. Eberhard actually preached unity and moderation. And for his part, William Lyon Mackenzie King took a lot of time to admit to the severity of the Depression. He was reluctant to send out government aid to anyone until it became very obvious that it had to be done. It was the Great Depression. Albertans didn't see it that way. They took it personally. So by 1935, this distrust and suspicion seemed to be already infused into the Albertan DNA. You can imagine. Don't trust those liberals. Don't trust the federal government. And those conversations were passed down through generations. The Great War interrupted much of the internal bickering. And just after the war, well, you know what happened? Alberta discovered oil. One would think that money would buy happiness. It did not. It gets complicated fast, and I don't know that I could fairly and accurately explain it all here in the next few minutes. But it's kind of like this. Albertans make a lot of money from oil, even though much of what's left of it is this filthy, disgusting, high-emitting tar sands oil. And they have oil at a time when we are beginning to move away from carbon-based fuels. But yeah, Albertans make a lot of money from oil. The thing is, oil is a Canadian resource. And it's just that much of it is found in Alberta. We begin to see here where Albertans have a problem. Because in Canada, we have a system of equalization. Provincial governments pay into a federal fund based on their ability to pay, i.e., their economy. Not a perfect system, I get it, but that big pool of money, once collected, gets doled out to, let's call them the lower income provinces, so that basic services across Canada are relatively equal. Canada actually has 3 major transfer programs: Canada Health Transfer, Canada Social Transfer, and this third controversial one that sticks in the craw of Alberta, equalization. And what many Alberta politicians have found out over the years is that votes and victory can be found in the fueling, if you don't mind me using that term, the fueling of the federal grievance train that's been chugging down the tracks there since 1935. If you have nothing positive to say or no programs to offer, just unite the people in their hate of Ottawa, a long-time Albertan political strategy. As the former Alberta Premier and now disgraced Jason Kenney would say, why do we send $20 billion annually to Ottawa? Well, for one, that's what you signed up for back in 1905. You have to join the club, and your membership is valid as long as you pay your annual dues. Alberta always seems upset that, say, Quebec receives way more transfer funds than Alberta does. Well, Quebec's population is twice the size of Alberta. Today, over 3/4 of all transfer dollars are distributed by population, making it the fairest system it's ever been in Canadian history. It goes the same, by the way, for representation in government. It's representation by population, not by land mass, average income, or the amount of crude that is buried far below the ground. You look at those post-election maps of Canada. There's huge masses of conservative blue throughout the West. And then these little dots of liberal red in central Canada. Well, those little dots, that's where most of the people live. Representation by population, 40 million people in Canada. Half of them, 20 mil, live in Ontario and Quebec. And half of those, 10 mil, in a stretch from Toronto to Montreal. Entire population of Alberta, just under 5 million. Representation by population. Do they teach civics in Alberta schools? Ottawa actually makes more money per Albertan from GST and from income tax, which all Canadians pay. It makes more money there than it does per Albertan from transfer fees, and by a lot. It's not that Albertans pay more, it's that higher income people pay more. Alberta also likes to cry foul during times of recession. Oh, and because their government is in a deficit. We're in a deficit and we have to give money to Ottawa. Well, to the first one, recession, your biggest resource is part of a complicated global oil industry, volatile due to international unstable governments, wars, and weather. Oil is most plentiful where it's least needed, so there's all the freight and transportation issues. There's international tariffs, there's OPEC, and on and on and on. You don't just strike oil and move to Beverly, pile up money in Mr. Drysdale's bank. Those days are gone. And as mentioned earlier, the world is and must move away from fossil fuels. It's existential. And how much does the oil and gas industry contribute to Canada's GDP? 3%. That's it, 3%. So, Alberta, stop throwing oil in our face. You have quickly become a one-trick pony in a one-horse town. And as far as your deficit, well, it was you that chose to have low taxes, yet continue high spending. That's more money going out than coming in. That's your fault. Alberta often also likes to cite Quebec as an example. If Quebec can claim sovereignty, why can't we? I grew up in the prairies. There was always a large swath of distrust of the French, the Quebec French. The Frenchies used to call them Pepsis because of the alleged preference of that cola. Oh, there were other epithets, as you may guess, but let's move on. As a matter of fact, part of the Alberta secession movement picked up again in the 1970s when Pierre Trudeau spirited bilingualism and multiculturalism. That just didn't sit right with Albertans. Why should I have to learn to speak French? Well, on this, again, read your history. Canada was settled and colonized by the French and the English. They were the two big colonizers of the day. They were both trying to take over the world. They fought a war that lasted 7 years, sometimes called the 7 Years' War. Plains of Abraham, all that stuff. The Brits won. Damned redcoats. If they would have lost, it wouldn't be British Columbia. It would probably be Western Quebec. We'd have a Quebec and an also Quebec. We'd call it Q2. West of Ottawa was Upper Canada, basically Ontario. East, Lower Canada, the French, Quebec. Point is, the French language, culture, the presence in Canada goes back over 400 years. And French people are woven into the early fabric of this fledgling nation. Alberta, on the other hand, social credit, something, what now? Alberta comparing their cause to Quebec has to be insulting to Quebecers. Even the Bloc, which is a recognized federal party that sits in the House of Commons in Ottawa, represents only Quebec, and not all Quebecers, as we see in every election. Quebec is the second highest populated province in the country. Again, representation by population. But even the Bloc said recently, during all this tariff trade war talk, that we must stand together to fight for Canada, and only after we win that fight will the Bloc again stand up for a sovereign Quebec. The Bloc Quebecois said that. Meanwhile, Danielle Smith, Alberta, she was visiting Mar-a-Lago with Kevin O'Leary to kiss Trump's ring. Quebec's status, the way they govern, their existence within Confederation, just seems to irk the crap out of Alberta. But they are two entirely different situations. Not fair to compare them. Listen, as you know, I'm torn on this whole nationalistic pride, patriotism thing. I kind of like being Canadian. I do feel proud when Canada shows well on the international stage. I appreciate many of our rights and freedoms, our choices, our moral compass, so on and so forth. But, geopolitical boundaries are just that. Economic and strategic lines drawn for ease of management. Lines that then politicians turned into social and cultural rules for self-identity. You're a Canadian if. Only a proud Canadian would. You're not a Canadian if. I don't know about that. I always remember this scene from the movie Casablanca. Unique because it's a movie that was written and shot during World War II, released during World War II, and the movie is about World War II, Casablanca.
Mademoiselle Lund, Monsieur Leslie, may I present Major Heinrich Strasser?
How do you do?
This is a pleasure I have long looked forward to.
I'm sure you'll excuse me if I'm not gracious. But you see, Major Strasser, I'm a Czechoslovakian.
You were Czechoslovakian. Now you are a subject of the German Reich.
I've never accepted that privilege, and I'm now on French soil.
I should like to discuss some matters arising from your presence on French soil.
German authority, French soil, a proud Czechoslovakian. Yeah, sure, until about 50 years later, when their citizens started to complain, hey, I'm not a Czech, I'm a Slovak. Well, I'm not a Slovak, I'm a Czech. Can't you two just live together in Czechoslovakia? Czechoslovakia, it's a portmanteau, it's a cool-sounding name. Can't you just... No, we can't. All right, you're two different countries then. Yugoslavia split like 6 different ways. There's over 50 new countries in Africa since World War II. A lot of that was decolonization. Over a dozen new countries after the fall of the USSR. 1945, the world had 99 countries. 2025, 195 countries. Every little sector and territory suddenly wanted their own country. Everybody wanted their own piece of terra firma. We gotta be Ukraine. We gotta be Taiwan. All right, I guess I should support that. California wants to secede. Texas often threatens. So why not Alberta? Maybe they could drag Saskatchewan away with them. There seems to be an appetite there as well. We could just go back to pre-September 1905, where we are not one country from sea to shining sea. Geographically, Canada is the second largest nation in the world. So, yeah, maybe this is too much land for one country. If they want out so bad, maybe we should just let them go. Just move out already. I'm tired of the bickering. And what would they be? Would they be their own country? Would they be a territory or a state of the United States? Who knows? Who knows if they've even thought that through? Yeah, so what if you want to be your own country? Well, okay. What currency will you use? What about borders, security, and international travel? You'll need new airport codes. What about international trade, regulations, tariffs? Will you have trade agreements and treaties? How about foreign affairs? Will you have embassies and ambassadors? What are you going to do for health and education? Will you have your own post office and stamps? What type of ruling government will you have? Will there be a constitution or a charter of rights? Will you join the United Nations? Will you get a new flag? What will you do for an anthem? Where will all the money come from to do this? And you'd have to change your name. You can't be named after the daughter of a British monarch. That would just be a daily symbol of the oppression you've suffered all these years under the rule of Ottawa. Will you still have 2 teams in the Canadian Football League? There's always this counter-argument, We're all stronger when we work together. Sometimes that sounds like as much bullshit as Alberta's call for sovereignty. 2 competing ideals, 2 competing principles, both of which I'm just tired of hearing. Should everybody have their own little kingdom? Or are we stronger if we all work together? Frankly, I don't know. Let them vote. I'm sure that there won't be busloads of people descending on Calgary and Edmonton like there were in Montreal and Quebec City in 1995 when they had their last referendum. Remember that? The voter turnout in Quebec was over 93%, unparalleled turnout. No, we don't want to leave Canada, won that vote, but by just over 50%. My Canada includes Quebec. That was the big slogan. Does your Canada include Alberta? I bet most people don't care. Maybe this is all helping to prove Alberta's point. The rest of the country really doesn't care about you. Or maybe we would if you'd stop whining so much. Let them vote, let them go. There's just no pleasing them. We bought them a pipeline. Didn't seem to matter. They hate Ottawa. Hell, for almost 10 years, our Prime Minister was from Calgary. What did Stephen Harper do for you, Alberta? Apparently not enough. You want out. I'm tired of fighting for this relationship. Go already. Chrystia Freeland is from Alberta. Mark Carney was raised there. They have people like Naheed Nenshi and Rachel Notley. Amarjeet Sohi is the Liberal mayor of Edmonton. Liberal support in the last federal election was up by like 26%. Liberals won 2 seats in that province. The NDP won 1. But it's just not enough, is it? As a matter of fact, the people I just mentioned and their supporters, I guess they'll eventually be in the long lines of migrants trying to escape from the oppressive land of Pistofistan. All of their belongings strapped to their back, trying to emigrate to Canada. We'll have to have fundraisers for them, get some food and clothing and temporary housing until they can begin to make their own way in this country. Because the conservative separatist movement has a stranglehold on the soon-to-be free nation of Pistofistan. I also like Stampedia, home of the world's largest annual rodeo. Boy, it'll be a shame to lose that. Yeah, because it was always fun to see which prime minister looked stupidest in a cowboy hat. The most radical, right-wing, MAGA-like federal party leader we've ever had in this country couldn't get re-elected in a place he spent the last 20 years. So you know what they're going to do? They're going to move him back to Alberta because they will vote him in. What happens if Canada's official opposition leader in Parliament in Ottawa represents a region that just seceded from Canada? Who had that on their bingo card, as they say? As much as I think about, nation building, it has really been compromised and co-opted as a political strategy. I do think Canada is this thing, this entity that we're proud of, and that Alberta is not that thing. And what if they leave and then they want to come back? You know how it is when you first move out? It doesn't always take the first time. Sometimes you got to move back in with the folks. Do we let them? Well, that's all a ways away. First they have a petition, then possibly a referendum, then we'll see. My view is it's imminent. The only question is, will it be just Alberta or Alberta and Saskatchewan? Hey, we've got 3 territories. I'm sure any of them would appreciate full provincial status. It's like we lose a couple of players, but we've got bench strength. Here's an idea. Before Alberta gets a chance to ask to leave, how about we kick them out?
Later That Same Life is written, voiced, and produced by Larry Fedoruk. LarryFedoruk37@gmail.com. Subscribe to Larry's podcast YouTube channel. Get automatic notifications with each new episode.